So in lesson 3, we're going to set up a basic call flow. Now this will be a skeleton to get our basic call flow in place. In a subsequent video, we'll come back and enhance this call flow with other options like a more enhanced callback capability. We'll be able to create different behaviors for what callers experience when they're in queue, and we'll look at more advanced ways to handle the IVR call tree. And at some point, we'll even uh, program the Lambda functions for data types. So by way of review, let's take a look at how this initial call flow is going to be set up. We're just going to bring the caller in. First thing we're going to do is check to find out if we're on hours or off hours. When we figure that out, we're either going to route them to an open call center call flow, or we're going to send them to the after hours call flow, which will probably transfer them off to a voicemail system. We're going to have 4 queues in our solution: a sales queue, a support queue, a ticket status queue, and a callback queue. And I'll explain the callback queue as we move further through the lessons. We'll also talk about creating a kind of a fictitious estimated wait time for callers. So that's what this lesson is going to be about. Let's go ahead and log in. Several different ways to log into your portal. This is where we arrive by first logging into AWS, and then going to services and selecting Amazon Connect, selecting our instance, and we can log in here. Or you can just use this URL, which will take you to a page that looks something like this, and you can go ahead and just, this is where your agents would be going anyway to log in. So let's quickly take a look at this dashboard once again. When you come into the dashboard, you're either going to see this screen, which is a reminder of how to go about setting things up, and or you're hiding this guide and you're looking at some statistics. Now, as I pointed out in the previous tutorial, there are already defaults set up for your instance. So as you saw in the previous tutorial, we have the ability to place an inbound call and answer it, and we didn't have to really do any of the call flow. It was already set up for us. In fact, if you go to contact flows, you're going to see a list of about 19 call flows. They have names. And what you will want to note is that their status is published. Published means they're operational. Now, it's often useful to select one of these guys and then save it with a new name so that you don't just destroy your samples here. I will point out to you that you cannot delete call flows. So when you first get started, you're probably going to have a lot of junk call flows in your portal. Try to keep that in mind. Currently, you can't delete call flows, and you probably don't want to modify these guys. They're very good ways to get started. So if we go back to the dashboard, we'll see that per the guide, they want you to get a phone number as step one. And as you recall, we did in fact get a telephone number, and you'll see that it is already pointing to a default contact flow that was created as a sample for you to use. It also enables you to get the call center up and operational. So going back to the call flows, in this list, you will find basically a sample of each of the features that are available to you in the system. Now, in the dashboard, it said the first place we want you to go is to set up your hours. Modify is you can change this to company main greeting hours, because you might have different queues that are open during different times. And what we're going to do here is edit this to be open at 8 a.m. and closed at 5 p.m. I haven't discovered a way to just copy this down. So let's take a minute here and get this out of the way. And Friday, 5 p.m. And let's just go ahead, scroll down here and save this. So this will be our new on hours. So now that we have our hours consistent with our call flow, we want to create a new call flow. We'll go over here to create call flow. And as I've said before, it is often very easy to just come in here, for example, sample inbound call flow, which per the default settings is the call flow that folks hear. But you can just open this up, save it as something else, and modify it. For purposes of showing you how best to work with this, we're not going to do that until later. What we're going to do here is we're going to create a new call flow. Now, in your call flows, you will find that you have different functional capabilities. There's an interact series of steps, your set steps, your branching steps, your integration steps, which is currently the Lambda function, and your terminate and transfer steps. Now, I have come to learn that depending on the call flow you're setting up, these lists will change. I went looking for a particular function once, and I found that in a particular call flow I was in, that function could not be uh, made available. So the first thing we want to do here is do some sets. So one of the things I like to do is set voice. And here in our text-to-speech applications, we can pretty much decide that we want an English-speaking person from the US with a number of different voices. You can play with this. The goal here, however, is if you're going to use text-to-speech elsewhere in your scripts, you might want to set it as part of the first step. So that's going to come into here. Next thing we're probably going to want to do is get a branch icon for check hours of operation, right? So what we're going to do here is come out of our voice set, and we're going to check for on hours and off hours. Now this is an embedded function. It's going to check that business hours that we set up. And based on that, we're going to give the caller some options. So probably we'll interact with them a bit by playing a prompt. So let's get that prompt, and let's get that prompt. So this prompt is going to be the on hours prompt, and this will be the off hours prompt. And one of the beauties of this is to use the text-to-speech capability because we're waiting for the client to figure out the actual recording. we can't wait for the voice artist, so we're going to go ahead and prototype it by putting in spelling counts, apparently. And we want this interpreted as text. Later on, you'll see that there are times when we want to interpret this as speech markup language, but right now we're going to interpret it as text. And after hours, we're probably going to do the same thing. Text to speech. Okay, that'll work. And let's go get ourselves a transfer icon. Transfer the phone number, and we'll drop that puppy right in here. Connect that up there. Transfer this. We don't have a number pre-recorded, so we're going to go ahead and enter one here. Now, many of the icons, let's get some more space here. Many of the icons are going to have an error. And later on, when we enhance this call flow, we're going to create an error handling call flow that we'll have all of our errors point to. But currently, let's just, for purposes of moving this along, let us disconnect the caller and hang up. Not actually the best practice in the world, but let's go ahead and do that. The next thing we're going to do is get a transfer to flow. Now here's an example of where we want to transfer to a flow, but we haven't yet defined that flow. What you can do, however, is when you come in here, it'll show you the flows that it knows about. So for purposes of this discussion, we have to make a little note here that we set this temporarily to go to a call flow that we're not going to want to use later. And at that point, we've got our basic call flow in place. Here is where you go to save your call flow. Now it's not letting me save it, and that's because I haven't entered a name here. I like to name things. I'm just going to call this step one. So when I'm scanning through that long list of call flows, at least I'll know something that indicates what the call flow is being used for. You can enhance this, name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it step one here. Now, as soon as I name this call flow, I get the ability to save this. Now, what I want to show you is sometimes when you go to save something, so let's say save and publish, it's going to come back and it's going to show me my errors. So the first error here is on the check for hours of operation. And what's happened here is that we have to select the schedule that we created. So it's going to search, and as you see, company main greeting hours that we previously created. You may have different schedules for different call flows. So let's go ahead and select that. That should clear that error. And then over here, you'll find that we didn't connect the error section. So if you hover over here, it's going to tell you everything has to be connected or you can't save it. So I'm going to go ahead um, and just take this, whoops, take this guy here and drag him over here. Okay, so at this point, we should be able to save and publish. So once you have successfully saved and published, you'll get a published sign here. It's also a little useful to go over here, and when you named it, you should probably give it a description. And we can go ahead and save this again. Now, saving and publishing are two different things. This call flow, if we save and publish it now, it makes it active. Saving it without publishing it doesn't make it active. So it takes a little playing around. But at this point, we have our open check. And if we go back here to call flows, we should find step 1, contact flow, check for open or closed, and it's published. So if we continue to follow along the configuration guide in your dashboard, the next thing we should be doing is creating queues. So we'll go ahead and create the 4 queues that we need for the call flow as described in the previous tutorial. Let's go ahead and add a new queue called support. Hours of operation will stay the main greeting. We'll select the same phone number. By the way, if you had multiple phone numbers, you could pick a different one here. The default outbound whisper, I'll explain later. And let's go ahead and add that technical support. Now we have sales support, ticket. This is going to be, when this is selected, people will be asked to enter their ticket number, and we'll look it up in the database using Lambda. But right now, I just want to get it defined. Same operating hours, same telephone number, and the outbound whisperer. And just one more queue to go here. We're going to add the callback queue. And I like to have a separate group to handle callbacks. Main greeting, select the phone number again. You don't have to use the outbound whisper, but it is sometimes useful. Let's go ahead, add that queue. And at this point, we now have all of the queues that we plan to have in our call flow. So per the configuration guide, we're supposed to be setting up our prompts, but I find prompts to be the most difficult part of doing a call center. Typically, the implementation engineer is sitting around waiting for the voice artist to record the prompts, and the voice artist is sitting around waiting for someone to write the prompts. If you want to move the project ahead, use text-to-speech, prototype your prompts, and at that point, you can complete your project. When you get the prompts set the way everybody likes them, then you can have them professionally recorded. What we're going to do here is create a new call flow, and I've named it Step 2, Main Greeting. And after on hours check, you come here. Okay. One of the first things that you'll do in these scripts is to do some settings. So in a previous call flow, we set the voice. Now you can set the voice of your text-to-speech engine at different places through your call flows. If you want to use a different voice, different version of voice, different language, whatever, you would do that here. I've already set the voice. We did that in the step one with the call flow. But what we didn't do here was to set the recording behavior. So at the initial configuration, we declared some S3 buckets to be the holding for all recordings made by the call center. And this is where you set that attribute. You can set it for customer only, agent only. We're going to set it that we want to record both the agent and the customer call. Okay, at this point, we will begin to build out our call tree, and that is an interaction step of the type get customer input. So we're going to use text to speech and prompt the caller to select 1 for sales, dial 2 for support, and 3 for ticket status. Down here, you'll notice that there are no conditions. So actually, if we look at this step, we'll see that there's no call tree here. So we have to add the call tree. And you do that by adding another condition. So the condition here is going to be if they press 1. Let's add another if they press 2. Let's add another if they press 3. Okay. So if you save that now, you'll find that you have your 3 steps. I would point out that we've selected DTMF. In a future lesson, we're going to replace DTMF with a natural language speech interface using Amazon Lex. So you can look forward to that. It's the 21st century. While we're still asking people to press 1 for this is beyond me. But at any rate, we'll go ahead and do this. And once we do that, we're going to want to set the queue. Now, before you can transfer a caller to queue, you have to set the queue. And we're going to do this for sales. And we're going to set the queue 3 times. Right? So this one is for ticket support. And this one is for technical support. And let's just go ahead and connect them up. Now, as I said before, you can't transfer to a queue until you set the queue. So at this point, we have the option of going down to transfer here, and we could transfer to queue. So we might take this guy out here and say transfer to the sales queue. But given that we want to set the experience that these folks, the callers, will have when they're in queue, we're going to want to transfer them to a flow that addresses that behavior conditioning. And we only need to do it one time, right? So what I'm going to do here is after we set the queue for sales, support, and ticket, we're going to transfer not to a queue, but to a flow. And the way we do that is select a flow here. And I think the flow we want to use is a sample customer queue. That's one of the default call flows. Now, this is not what I want to do, but I need a placeholder here. We won't be able to save this call flow. The other thing that we need to do is our error handling and how we're going to handle timeouts. Now, error handling, as I told you earlier, we will create a separate call flow to handle that. But for the moment, we're going to disconnect and hang up. So let's go ahead and connect our errors. We've got several here. Each one of these guys has an error. By the way, make sure that they do in fact connect. And we have to deal with timeouts and default. In the case of default, we're going to send these folks over to the sales team, right? Errors, we're going to hang up on them. And timeouts, I guess for the timeout, we'll also go ahead and send them over to the sales team. So if someone happens to call and for whatever the reason they can't enter a touch tone digit, they'll default or time out. And if we have an error, we'll go ahead and send that to the disconnect. Again, later on, we'll improve all of this. In the next tutorial, we'll talk about setting up the transfer to a flow that will manage the experience that callers have while they're waiting for an agent. So at this point, we should be able to save and we should be able to publish. So as you can see, we've got a saved indication. I don't see it published, but let's go back here to the dashboard, boom, command dashboard. And let's go to call flows. And we should see our step number 2 there. Step number 2, main greeting. You go here after the hour checked, and it is in fact published.